Well, welcome everyone. Are you having a good day so far? We sure hope so. You know, he reads like he could be a presidential candidate. But I do want you to know we're not going to be debating today. Howard and I are actually going to be talking about success, tapping into this brain that is brilliant, that truly took a company from 28 stores to 15,000 stores worldwide. You know the feeling you get when you see the Starbucks logo. So for the next 30 minutes, Howard and I are going to be chatting, and hopefully you will be learning, taking away some really good ideas, because this is the man who has a sharp mind and is ready to really tell us anything. So he doesn't know anything about the questions I'm going to ask him. But first, Howard, I thought I would start before I sit down with, how do you take your coffee?
Triple tall Americano every morning at about 6 o'clock. Black, no cream, no sugar. 3 shots of espresso and about 6 ounces of water. If that doesn't get you going, nothing will.
And they better know what you want when you get in there, right?
Right.
All right, I'll head over here. All right, well, I hate to say it, but I need my glasses now. Okay, so first we'll start by talk to us about your personal life. Let's get to know Howard a little bit better.
Well, I'm the son of 2 immigrants who came to Seattle in the early 1900s. My father was actually born in 1895. How's that one? Anybody have a father born in 1895 in this room? Probably not too many. And he came as a 15-year-old without any family, left his family behind, and somehow he got to Seattle, and he ended up working at the Pike Place Market pushing a cart. And he went to school at Broadway High School, which is now Seattle College up on Broadway, and learned the language and saved his pennies and nickels and dimes and opened up a small mom and pop grocery store. And my mother came from Latvia in about 1909 to Seattle, and with her family, and somehow they met in Seattle. And so I'm the son of 2 immigrants who basically worked a mom and pop retail store, and that's how I grew up.
Well, you were telling me a great story during dinner last night. Your father is a big influencer in your life. Tell him about the story, about what really impacted you the most as a young kid.
Well, we remember. It's amazing how some events stick with us in our lives, even as young children. And I was about 8 years old, and after school every day, I would come home from school, and we lived in a little apartment. There were 5 of us in 500 square feet. I have a bathroom that's bigger than that now. I'm always amazed, what we think we need today versus what we really need. And so I would go down and kind of play around at helping my dad. I'm sure I was more in the way. And one day he asked me to go get a couple of baskets of strawberries. And I went and got them, and I brought them up to the front counter, and I watched him put them in the customer's bag, and the customer left. And I was old enough to recognize that he hadn't rung those strawberries up on the cash register, which I was always used to seeing him do. And so I said, "Dad, you forgot to ring those up." And he just looked at me and he said, "Son, not everything we do in life do we need to get paid for. Some things we do just because we're good human beings." And he said, "I happen to know that those people who are not only our customers, but they're our neighbors and our friends, love strawberries. But I also know right now they're struggling financially. And so it was just my way of saying thanks and that we care about you." And I never forgot that lesson the rest of my life, is that you don't get paid for everything you do in life, nor should you. And you always have to remember to give more than you get, because there's only one reason any of us are put on this planet, and that's to serve other human beings.
And that is a big platform that you stand on, servant-led leadership.
Right.
What do you think that folks can do here, business owners or just in general, to live that servant life?
Well, I think it's hard to do, particularly when you're running businesses, because there are so many things coming at you. Not only the marketplace comes at you, which is difficult in itself, and then we have legislation that comes at us. We have all sorts of things that are pushing in our face and pushing against us and making it difficult. But if we can always remember why we're here, no matter what business you run, no matter what product or service you sell, can be only one reason for you being here, and that's to serve another human being. It doesn't make any difference if you're making widgets or you're selling coffee. If you're a widget maker, you make a widget that goes in a printing press. The printing press gets sold to a publisher. The publisher uses it to print a newspaper or magazine that gets delivered to somebody's door to inform or entertain them. So even the widget maker in the widget making company is here to serve another human being. And I think we forget that. We think that we're about selling a cup of coffee. We're thinking about selling, we think we're here to sell insurance, but or we think we're here to provide health care. But really it is all about serving other human beings. And that's what makes our societies work. Without it, we are nothing. The more we focus on it, the more we keep ourselves true to that idea, the better chance we have of economic success, the better chance we have of a fulfilling life. And I think at the end of the day, what the most important thing is to develop a fulfilling life, of which economic success is part of.
I love that you walk the walk. And even in your retirement years, you are still helping other people and teaching them how to do the same thing. This is not your first trip to Spokane. You do have ties to Spokane. Can you tell everybody what your ties are?
Well, this is the, Starbucks was the third company that had operations in Spokane. So, and I've been coming here since the UW and Wazoo used to play in the old football stadium. I forget the name of it. But so that was a long time ago, and how cold it was when we come here to play those games. I thought you intentionally turned up the cold just to...
To beat you.
Yeah, to beat us, yeah. So, but I was on the board of Sterling Bank after the reorg, and so I was here until the bank merged with Umpqua, and then I'm on the board of the leadership school at Gonzaga. So my ties here are quite deep. I've been coming here since I was a little child, and I feel at home here because it has the soul of what Seattle once was, a small city. You have a gem here, and I hope you know it.
Oh, you know, I think we do. Yeah. But still, as business owners, you want growth. You want people to get their education and stay. We want to provide more livability here in our region. And we would love to tap into your knowledge and how we go about doing that. When you started Starbucks from 28 stores and taking them all the way to 15,000 in your tenure, what were some of the failures that you had along the way?
Do we have that much time? So I was there 3 months, and I looked at the compensation that we were paying our baristas, and we were basically paying minimum wage. And I felt that we needed to change that, primarily from a values perspective. I just didn't think it would work, but secondarily from the perspective that we wanted to be able to attract people that had a little more experience than maybe the typical fast food worker. And so I made a decision with the approval of the board and the management team to raise wages by about $1 to $1.50 an hour, which was at that time about a 20% increase. And I'd done all the financial planning, and I thought I knew what it was going to cost us and what we were going to have to do with pricing to make up for it. And so we implemented it, and of course I wasn't going to see the numbers for at least a month before we had a full month of seeing what it was going to do. So I went on vacation just before the P&Ls came out for that month, and all of a sudden I get this emergency call from Howard Schultz. You got to get back here. I think we've blown this place up. And so I said, what happened? He said, well, the numbers that you projected were totally wrong. So, oh man, I'm thinking I'm just there 3 months. My job is going to be over, right? Because I must have really blown it. And I got back, and I projected about actually a 1% increase in sales, or as a percentage of sales, and it ended up being double that, 2%, which was significant, particularly for a company that was losing money. So, I said, we're not going back. We made a commitment, it was the right thing to do. Now, what do we need to do to adjust? And so we adjusted some other costs, and we adjusted some pricing more, and we had to solve the problem. But, that was the first big mistake, and that was only 3 months in. Probably the next one of the other biggest mistakes I made. Anybody remember a drink called Mazagran? It was in a bottle, the most beautiful bottle you could ever see, a kind of a crystal-looking bottle like a Coca-Cola bottle, only much prettier. And we had created this drink, and the name came from the French Foreign Legion. And it was the French Foreign Legion used to drink coffee with a sparkling water, naturally sparkling water. And it was a cooling, refreshing drink. And so we thought we could make this beverage that was just like that. We tested it. It was a joint venture with Pepsi. And Pepsi had millions of dollars, and they poured millions of dollars into all the research. And we were going along, and we thought we had the best drink possible, and it was going to be huge. So we get it out there. It didn't last 1 month before it blew up. So, best laid plans. And I still have a bottle in that plastic, where you can put it all and surrounded by plastic. I have it in my office to remind me about mistakes, because that mistake turned into an absolute winner. It became bottled Frappuccino. So the mistake that we made with Mazagran became bottled Frappuccino, which is now a $4 billion business globally.
That's amazing.
So, from great mistakes can come great successes.
Absolutely. Can learn from them along the way. Well, how would you define success, and what advice would you give to those wanting a successful business and life?
Well, when I think about it, I'll put it in a Starbucks words. So I think that, I used to say, this was 30 years ago, when I'm retired someday out in the future, which I couldn't even imagine, but now I are one, and I'm 72 years old, so I don't have that many more years.
Is it hard to wear a tie today?
I hate wearing ties. I hate wearing ties. But so I thought, how am I going to define success or failure at Starbucks? And here's how I look at it. I'll never remember the numbers. I'll never remember the profits. I'll never remember the stock price. But I always remember the people and the communities that we affected. And I hope the Starbucks' primary mission goes like this. We want to nurture and inspire the human spirit every day. We want to be one of the well-known and respected organizations in the world, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. And I hope that someday when I'm in that rocking chair in the nursing home, that there's a newspaper article that says they weren't perfect, but they did do what they set out to do, which was primarily nurture and inspire the human spirit. Nothing about coffee, nothing about how many stores we opened, nothing about how much money we made, but what we did for people. I think at the end of the day, that's how I would like Starbucks to be judged. And if you ask me how I want to be evaluated, that's how I want to be evaluated. Judge me on what I did or didn't do for people, and not on anything else. And I think all of us need to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror every day and say, how did we do today? How do we do today in serving other human beings? And if we can answer in the affirmative, we can pat ourselves on the back. If we can't answer in the affirmative, we have to say to ourselves, how can I do better tomorrow?
Great advice. And what I thought was really neat, we were talking last night, and Howard was saying that we were talking about how we're all car people during dinner and the cars that we love and that we've had. And he said, my wife loves her minivan. She loves her minivan because she can take all the grandchildren in it, and it opens its doors on its own with the push of a button. So stayed humble, too.
It's called the grandma van. And the kids all love it. They always want to know where the grandma van is.
Oh, that's so great. Well, what leadership principles make good companies great?
I think there's one primary one. There's a couple, but one primary one. And that is companies and leaders that live up to their values. They don't talk a good game, they live a good game. There's too many of us in this world that talk a lot about how we really care about people. When push comes to shove, we're not willing to give of our own wealth or our own time to really help other human beings. And that is primarily, if you look at it in the businesses or organizations that we run, that's where it really counts. Look, taking care of the people that work in our businesses is not just about paying them well or fairly. It's also about how we help them grow as human beings. Because at the end of the day, our primary role isn't to make better employees. Our primary role is to make better human beings that turn into better employees. And that takes a little bit different view kind of the world. And I think that leaders that, and I've used this word myself, we hear this word, people are our most important asset. When I hear that word today, I kind of cringe. And I cringe that I ever said it, because human beings are not assets. Assets you own. Assets are trucks, computers, buildings, whatever it happens to be. And assets pretty much always give you what you expect to get. As long as you take care of that truck, that computer, and you take care of the building you own, it performs for you and never surprises you. But human beings are always surprising you, right?
It's life.
I don't know how many of you are married here, but if you've been, we know that, aren't we always amazed at how our spouses surprise us?
Or how we surprise
I've been
them.
married for 39, I've been married for 39 years, and I'm always amazed what comes out of my wife's mouth after 39 years. But that's life. And so human beings are not perfect, right? We do great things, we don't do such great things, we make mistakes, we have successes, and we have to, as bosses and leaders, we have to learn to forgive, we have to learn to coach and understand just what they are, imperfect people. Just like we are imperfect. Particularly if we run business for a while, we can hardly remember all the mistakes we've made. And we're always sit in judgment of the people that work in our organizations. We have to hold them accountable, but primarily we have to coach them and try to make them better people.
Well, this leads me to generations. I always tell my students at Gonzaga that you're not getting hired by your peer. You're getting hired by somebody that lived in a different generation. So for those that are hiring the millennials, how do we deal with the change, the differences in who we are and how we grew up and what we value?
I think there are differences, there's no question. But every generation has had its differences with the previous generation. Look, human beings are human beings. There's some pretty basic things. I opened stores in 57 countries around the world and did agreements and I traveled 80% of the time. And so I was immersed in those cultures. And every place you went was a different culture that looked at their lives a little bit differently. But there are some pretty basic things that all human beings care about. They all want to be treated with respect and dignity. They all want to be loved or be loved. They all wanted to grow as human beings. They all wanted to have an opportunity to have more responsibility. They all wanted always more for their families or for themselves. And those things are pretty universal, no matter what the color of your skin is, no matter what culture you come from, or what age you are. And so I think we have to be careful when we judge them, even though they do have some differences. They're a little thinner skinned, I think, than we were. Some of it comes, I think, from everybody got a trophy when they were growing up. And we were talking about that last night. And that's just part of their world. I'm on the board of 2 companies in Silicon Valley, and both CEOs tell me the same thing, that you got to be extremely careful when you're coaching because it's hard for them to take input. They see it as somehow they're bad when they're not. And so we just have to learn to live with that. They're our future leaders. So we don't have a choice. I'm 72. What am I going to do? It's their life. So my job is to help them be better as best as they can and understand them as best as they can and help them be a better human being.
Great. How important is entrepreneurship and startups in the economic development of a community?
It's everything. I mean, let's go. If I went through this room, I don't care what every organization, whether it was business or nonprofit, somewhere in its past was started by somebody with an idea. And it takes that to make it go, and you never know. Look at Starbucks today. When I started at Starbucks, I was trying to escape corporate life.
How'd that work out for you?
Yeah, I didn't want to be in a big corporation. And I was there for 6 months before I said, I'm back in it again. And it goes from a little tiny company that was losing money in Seattle with 28 stores to a company now that's got a market cap of almost $80 billion. I mean, what are the odds? But, it was because of some people's dreams that started the company, and then primarily because of Howard Schultz's vision. He saw a different company. And he just had this dream, and he was just ferocious about taking it there. There's one word that I've learned that describes every entrepreneur. This is not just business entrepreneurs. I think sometimes we use entrepreneur only in the business sense. Anybody that's running or started a nonprofit is just as much an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
Or leading a new school is just as much an entrepreneur. So Howard had that one word in spades, persistence. Entrepreneurs don't know from the word no. The minute you say no to them, that's the beginning of the conversation. I used to laugh about Howard Schultz. You know, if he'd come into my office and he'd have this idea, and he was an idea minute guy. I mean, it was endless. You know, it would drive you crazy. But, you know, and he'd come in and say, what do you think of this? I think we should do this. Let's go. And I'd say, Howard, let's think about it for a little bit. You know, I was one of the gray hairs. He was a kid, and I was older. And he would, you know, he would leave my office, and then he would start going office to office to office until he found somebody who would say, hey, Howard, that's a great idea. And then he was immediately back in my office and say, you're wrong because Joe says it's a great idea. That's what they do. That's what they do, and that's what it takes. It takes persistence to make anything work. You know, you just can't give up.
Great advice. How important is corporate culture? You know, people don't have culture statements. We at KHQ have a culture statement that's on the wall, and we all live by it. Even the people that come in that don't know our culture soon find what our culture is and what makes us move. How important is it, and why should a company who doesn't have a culture statement yet think about creating one?
Culture is everything. You have a culture whether you define it or not. Whether it's on a piece of paper or not on a piece of paper, you have a culture. Your culture is reflective of who you are as a leader, who your leaders are, how they treat their people, how you treat your customers, how you live your life. Every family, if you have children, you have a culture in your family, whether it's espoused or not. Whether you talk about it or not, you have it. It's much better to be conscious and intentional about it than it is to be unintentional. So it's much better to define it and talk about it. What matters to you? What matters in this organization? Kind of what makes this place tick, and why are we all here together? What's our greater purpose? Who are we serving, and why are we serving them, and how do we want them? How do we want to serve them? But culture is everything. Culture makes every organization tick, and whether you like it or not, it's alive and well in your organizations, and we see it. Look, I hope nobody's here from Wells Fargo, and I'm not going to just pick on you, but I will. Okay. For all your competitors, you probably love it. But look, how does that happen? Right? In a company, in a bank that's been around and got through pretty much the crisis pretty well unscathed and was well thought of with great leadership, how does that subculture develop in a company where it was okay to do what they did? It was impossible for the CEO not to know that was going on. Impossible. I don't care what he says. I don't care what that leadership says. They knew, and they tried to hide it instead of facing up. And so what is that? They take a company that's so well respected, and because there's this drive to attain certain results, right? It went from a good idea. There's nothing wrong with trying to sell your customers more products, is there? As long as it's done as an honest, caring, and loving way, you know, with respect and dignity. But it was done with anything but, and their people felt they had to cheat, right, to keep a job. That's not the kind of culture you want in your organization. So values matter, and culture is everything.
So if Wells Fargo, the CEO, were to come to you and say, Howard, how do I dig myself out of this one? What advice would you give?
Step up, take the bullet, and if you're not going to resign, the first thing I do is say, I'm giving you back everything I've earned for the past 2 years when this thing came out, and it came out in 2013. So they knew about it in 2013 that they had a problem. And everything I've earned from that point forward, I will give back, and I will not take a dime until this is turned around. And if you still want me then, I'll stay, and if you don't, I will leave.
I think that deserves a huge round of applause right there. Step up.
I'll tell you why I'm so this is so important. We are struggling to gain credibility in the marketplace. Right? Businesses are not seen in such a great light right now, particularly in banking. But there's lots of industries, right? And if we don't take the high road, if we're not conscious capitalists, then we get what we deserve. And we have to be above reproach, beyond reproach. We have to live 100% to our values. When we make a commitment to do the right thing, that has to be 100% of the time, no matter what it costs you. Because the cost you avoid now will be 10 or 1,000 times more if you do the wrong thing.
What can cities and counties do to make sure that we retain businesses and jobs in the community?
Stop over legislating, right? Look, you can legislate the things where there's criminal stuff or it's really bad things. What's going on now is we're trying to solve social problems on the back of businesses. We're not going to do it. It hasn't worked anyplace else in the world. It is not going to work here. And I live in a city that's off the deep end. It really is. And it's off the deep end. What's so amazing to me is they've basically identified two areas in the economy, restaurants and retail, right? Particularly in part-time work. So, I'm not going to argue about $15 an hour minimum wage. I think it's too high. I think that we're making a mistake. All right, fine, $15, $20. It doesn't make any difference as long as the customers are willing to pay for it, right? Because that's the only person that pays for it. There's nobody else that pays for it. So as long as the marketplace holds up, you're fine. But when you add an inflation adjustment to it, you're setting into place something that you cannot change. See, retail bricks and mortar stores today are in stagflation. Anybody old enough to remember stagflation? I mean, that about brought us to his knees. Remember that? Inflation at, what was it, 13%, 14%, and sales going down? Well, bricks and mortar retail is in stagflation. You know how many companies are close to bankruptcy or in deep trouble? Big ones. And they're struggling not because they're bad. The internet's changed their models. And so they're going to have to try, they're trying to find out how to survive. So if you're trying to get rid of bricks and mortar, just keep batting onto them. You'll get rid of them a lot faster. If all you want is internet retail, fine, just keep doing it, and that's what you're going to get. And we just went through this whole scheduling issue in Seattle. A lunacy policy, solving a problem that existed at a very small level. And the most amazing thing about it is that most of the issues were in small restaurants. Right? The research at the University of Washington said that most of the issues in scheduling are at small restaurants. So what did they target the legislation to? Big food service and retailers. So because you had to have more than 500 people and more than 40 stores to fall under the new law. Now, is that common sense? Is that pragmatism? No, right? And it's worse than the $15 an hour because it's going to drive a wedge between people, employees and their employer for something that really is not a big deal. Let me give you an example of it. So they said we're not giving enough hours. So part of the law is you have to offer extra hours to your existing people. All right, in essence, you'd say, well, that's a good thing. I want you to think about it. Starbucks gives everybody benefits. If you work more than 20 hours a week, part-time worker, you get health care benefits, you get stock options, you get college degrees, all that stuff. Every person you add increases your benefit costs. So why wouldn't we want to give existing people more hours? If it was only an economic decision, you would give everybody who had more hours, so you'd have fewer people, and yet they legislate this. And I just think sometimes, particularly people, look, part of the problem is our legislators today, and excuse me, city council members, very few have any business experience. Very few. They don't understand the buttons that you push down and the buttons that pop up when you push those buttons down. They think they're just solving a social problem and everything will be okay. It will not be okay. You may not pay for it now, but you'll pay for it, and you'll probably be out of office before it really gets paid for. And it's not the right thing to do. Be pragmatic. If we got a problem, let's target down in and say, what is the exact problem we have? And don't try to solve every social problem with legislation. It's not going to happen. You won't do it.
What do you foresee will be employment trends in the future, and what will be expectations of the workforce, and how will that impact leadership?
Oh, God.
Do you want me to break that down?
You're asking me that question? John, you can answer that question probably better than I can. Yeah, both of you. Yeah, so, look, we don't need all college-educated workforce. I think we're way too focused on this 4-year degree. All right? That doesn't mean everybody couldn't have a college education. And I use that word college education, not vocational training. But I want to call vocational training. If you learn how to repair a Toyota motor and you go to work for Toyota and you get a degree, I want it to say college degree on it. So when I go home and I look at my kids, right, I can say, Dad graduated from college, Toyota Motor College. If you go to, I've been over in Walla Walla where they have this vocational school, high school that's next to the community college, I think, and where kids are learning healthcare, nursing, they're learning electrical repair, for houses and stuff like that, putting solar system. I mean, we can focus as much on that as we focus on the 4-year degree. I barely got through out of high school. And I had 2 years of community college at Everett, and what I was really good at was beer. And by the time I left Everett, I was even better at scotch. But I learned there, and where I really learned was working. And I had vocational training on the streets. I didn't have a formal program, but I worked in retail, and I became good at learning how to lead people, learning how to lead myself first, learning how to lead people and organizations, and how to run retail. And I became good at that, and there was nothing wrong with it. And it served me well my whole life. So we don't have to have all the stuff, but our kids have to have education more than they're getting. Whatever they love to do, we want to push them along that pathway. I think that every kid has to understand what it means to code. I think coding was like typing when we were in school. They have to learn the basics and what it means, because it's a language that you just need to learn to understand a little bit, even if you're not the best at it. So anyway, I think this whole thing with education fit to the needs of the child and to the marketplace. Not education that's some belief that somehow 4 years is a magic. If you go to Germany, most of their people are not college education. They're vocationally trained to work in factories or whatever it is that they're doing. And that's how they're providing jobs. And they're probably one of the leading economic forces in the world and a big exporter.
Howard, you said you traveled 80% of the time. Yeah. You've been to probably every country in this entire world. You've seen everything in your 70 some odd years of living. What is it that keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? Oh, God, everything. It's everything, my wife says, Howard, give it a break. You're 72. I read the newspaper and I get upset. And I read about this lot and I get upset. But, I'll tell you, is my grandchildren. Is that concern of what kind of world am I leaving them? And, I've finally come to the realization that I can change some things a little bit. Maybe I can adjust the dial a tiny bit. But what kind of world are we leaving them? And, I'm concerned with the politics of this country. What we are going through with this presidential election, I don't want my grandkids to hear it. Because I don't want them to think that language is okay. It is not okay. Right? Disrespecting other human beings is not okay. I don't care what... It doesn't make any difference what your politics are. Values are values. Being honest, caring, loving, those are values that are universal. And that's what keeps me up. I'm worried that they're getting the wrong message about what is okay.
Well, the truth of the matter is, it has been a pleasure. We have loved having you here. Spokane will always open its doors to you. Promise to come back?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard Behar.